Hi there, Steve Kaufman. I hope the sound is louder. There were some complaints about the sound here. I want to talk today about learning German. This is part of the series that I've been doing where I speak in a language other than English and then follow that up with a discussion about learning that language. I have been doing that the last few weeks, and of course, because I haven't been speaking much Spanish, German, and now I'm going to do Italian next week, therefore I wanted to refresh my knowledge of those languages before doing a video. And so I spent 3-4 days or so prior to the video on LINC studying that language. I found podcasts, I was reading in the language, I had discussions with some of our LINC tutors in the language, and so forth. One of the interesting things is that the comments that I've received from people who saw those videos or who spoke to me, our tutors, was that I had improved in those languages even though I hadn't spoken them much. This is a very interesting point because the fact that I've been working hard on other languages like Russian, Czech, Romanian, and so forth actually improves my ability to notice things in foreign languages. It improves my language learning fitness. And therefore, with a little bit of effort, I refresh my recently neglected languages and bring them back to a level which is often higher than it was before. I'm noticing this now in my Italian, that I, in fact, understand Italian better when I listen to audio, or at least podcasts that I find on the net about history or politics. I understand them better than I did before. So just a little note for those of you who sometimes are afraid to leave one language for 6 months in order to study another. Yeah, you'll slip a bit, but eventually you'll become a better language learner. Okay, now insofar as German, my parents were born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire into a German-speaking Jewish community in Moravia, which subsequently became part of Czechoslovakia, and so therefore they went to Czech school and they spoke both German and Czech. In 1939, they escaped to Sweden, where I was born in 1945, and at the age of 5, when I was 5, we moved to Canada. I have no recollection of transitioning from Swedish to English. At home, my brother and I, spoke English with my parents. They told us, we're in Canada now, you will speak English. My brother and I, my parents spoke German to each other. We resented German. We resented hearing it. We resented everything having to do with Europe because my parents would always say that Canadians were lazy, Canada had no culture, and so forth, and everything European was good, and they wanted us to make friends with the children of their European friends, and those were the last people we wanted to make friends with. So there was this resistance to German. Now, things changed when I was 19, after 2 years at McGill University, and I was working in a summer job on construction, and then I was laid off, and I thought, you know what, I think I'll go off to Europe. So I went down to the port of Montreal and spent 3 days trying to see the captains of different ships in the port. On the third day, I found a captain of a German ship who had lost a sailor in Quebec City and said, yeah, you can work your way across with us. So for 10 days, I was on this small tramp steamer, which was just up and down all across the Atlantic. I was hammering away at rust and scraping and painting. And that was the first time that it actually meant something to me to try and say something in German. And I had my little German book with the declensions of the nouns and the pronouns, and it was just horrendous. But at least then German became meaningful to me briefly. And then I hitchhiked around Europe, including in Germany. I can remember even I usually stayed in youth hostels. I arrived in, I think it was Böblingen, and it was pouring with rain after 11 o'clock at night. And I went to their local jail and asked if I could stay there, and they accommodated me. Very comfortable jail. And then I also worked 2 weeks on construction in Vienna, where I spoke some German, although most of the other workers were Turks. And that was it. And then I studied for 3 years in France, did nothing with German, until 1987, when I was between jobs. I was, after my 3 years in France, I joined the Canadian Diplomatic Service, was sent to Hong Kong to learn Mandarin Chinese, subsequently went to Japan, then I left the embassy, went to work for a major Canadian forest products exporting company. It's So that's through the 70s. And then in 1987, I left. I was between jobs, and I decided to learn German. I'm not quite sure why. So I went to all of the secondhand bookstores in Vancouver, and I found lots of books, textbooks that other people had used. Things like this. And they're full of texts, more or less boring text, and vocabulary, which is what I needed. They also have Übungen, drills and stuff, which I have always resisted doing in language learning. I don't like them. If anything, all I do with them is I look up the answers so I can see some concentrated examples of whatever pattern they're trying to test you on. But I feel it's not that useful to try and scratch your brain to answer these questions. At any rate, I didn't bring them all down. I showed more of them in my German language video. There were lots of them. And of course, interesting about German history, culture, and so forth. And of course, even though I initially was kind of resisting German, the more you get into a language, the more you find it interesting. And this is another, I think, important point. People say, I'm not that interested in whatever. Get into it, start into it. You may find that, as they say in French, l'appétit vient en mangeant. In other words, the appetite grows with the eating. And so then you get more and more into it and you find it interesting. As soon as possible, I tried to get away from these sort of textbooks. One very good source was a series of audio cassettes of ordinary people talking. And I listened to those interviews many, many times. I can remember them. One was an interview with a locomotive engineer who had driven the train when the Queen of England was on the train. And another guy was talking about how farmers in Bavaria can't find wives because they smell, and a whole bunch of stuff, but real people. And I've always felt that listening to real people speaking, if it's transcribed and you get a chance to, I didn't have transcripts, but ideally transcripts is an ideal way to learn. And that's why when we set up Link, I began, and initially we only offered English, and I started interviewing lots of people and creating content on Link with transcripts, because I felt that if you give people the chance to feel that they're eavesdropping on a genuine conversation, that's very effective learning material. So that was more or less what I did with German. Stayed with it. Then it so happened that I set up my own company in the trade of wood products. And we were, in the early 90s, selling wood to Germany. So I was now traveling to Germany. And so then I tried even harder to learn German, bought books, read, and of course spoke with people, and gradually my German improved. And I also began to appreciate German culture more. Just to digress, in my previous videos about Russian or Spanish, I explain, or French, some of the attractiveness of those cultures. And German culture is often seen as, less fun than, let's say, Italian or Spanish, the sun and music and so forth. But you have to appreciate cultures for what they are. And I think the thing about German culture is this sense of comfort, solid comfort. You stay in a German hotel, the doors close solidly, the windows are solid. And so German culture to me is less about dancing and singing. It's more about, it's like you're sitting there reading a book or one of these very serious German newspapers, and Bach is playing in the background, and it's raining outside, but that's comfortable too. I like that, and I like their pubs with the wonderful wooden paneling, and so you kind of learn to appreciate each culture for what it is. And of course the towns in Germany, especially the smaller towns, are absolutely beautiful. And Germany, historically, Charlemagne, who's revered in France, was in fact a Frank. Germans have had a major imprint on European history. Martin Luther, of course, the 30 Years' War. By the way, there's an excellent audiobook on the 30 Years' War, which I've listened to many times. Of course, in the more recent past, there's been, with 2 world wars, where we won't go into that subject, but today in Germany, and I can say this as someone of Jewish background, that no country has addressed you know, their own recent history the way the Germans have. It's amazing. It's amazing to walk around Hamburg and see plaques with the names of Jewish people who used to live in that house. And so, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you know, as my uncle once said, the Germans of that generation, of the generation of the war, he doesn't want to have anything to do with, but Germans of subsequent generation, absolutely no problem at all. And in fact, the Germans, I find, are very friendly. I recently drove through Germany. People in to the, you know, the superficial contact that I have with them in hotels or gas stations, whatever, super friendly. And there's 100 million German speakers in Europe, so it's an extremely important language. So I think there's so many positive reasons. Now, some people say they like German rock music. I don't do rock music, hard rock, all that stuff, rap, whatever. I don't even know what it is. I have no interest. But in fact, I'm a bit old-fashioned. I like Goethe, you know, so I like listening to audiobooks of Goethe. I love his language, and you can get the texts on the internet, and so I can import them into Link and study them. You know, what else? I like reading about history. So, you know, for something like this, for example. And unfortunately, many of these books, you know, there are, you can probably see it, there's a lot of words that I don't know. I would prefer to read these on Link so I could look them up and learn the words. But when you're down to not too many words that you don't know, then it's not that big a chore to read without knowing all the words. I'm trying to think of what else I wanted to say about German. Yeah, I mean, it's an extremely important language. I think a lot of people in Eastern Europe now are, because of the economic might of Germany, German in Eastern Europe, in Russia, is becoming the next important language after English. And it's a fascinating, in terms of its literature, in terms of history, in terms of philosophy, it is a fascinating culture. I am not into science or medicine, but even there, of course, German has in the past been very important. I wanted to finish off with one other point that has come up, and that's this issue of talent. You know, some people say to me, oh, you have a talent for languages, or I have, like talking about themselves, I have no talent for languages. I don't think talent is all that important. Granted, you may sit there and say, well, Steve, you know, your parents spoke German to each other, you heard German at home, you spoke Swedish for the first 5 years of your life, therefore you can learn other languages more easily. I can't do that, say some people. But then I look around and I see all of the wonderful polyglots that I know in our polyglot community on the internet. If I think of Luca, who grew up unilingual Italian, Richard Simcott grew up unilingual English. If I think of all the Swedes that I know, or the Dutchmen who are, or Germans who are so fluent in English, it's not about talent. Some people may be better than others in terms of their ability to imitate accent, but overwhelmingly it's your motivation, your interest in the language, your sense that you will achieve your goal, that you're willing to stay with it, spend the time, and of course to develop that ability to notice. And that's so important. And that's why I made reference at the beginning of my talk about how taking a break from German, Spanish, Italian actually improved my ability to notice what's going on in German, Spanish, and Italian. And that's why, for example, when I read away from Link, I will always underline words and phrases. And of course, in Link, those of you who aren't familiar with Link, you save words and phrases, which we call creating links. Well, I create them by the tens of thousands. The more you can create those links, and then they reappear highlighted in yellow, that draws your attention to words, to phrases, to patterns. And you have to do that in order to help the brain notice. Otherwise, we notice some things, but we don't notice other things. And the more things we can notice that the brain has already grown accustomed to noticing, the more new things we can notice. So to finish off, then I would like to say, rather than focusing on talent, worrying about whether you have talent or not, focus on developing the ability to notice. So there you have it. Again, I ran over my 10 minutes, but some complained that my videos were too long and others said they didn't mind.